Gaborone and its surrounding areas have a population of over 420,000 inhabitants. The city itself has an area of around 192 square kilometers, yet has over a dozen malls, with some still under construction. Each year witnesses yet another mall spring up in what us lay people would assume is a response to an increase in disposable income and a corresponding improvement in quality of life. Household consumption nationally was almost equal to GDP in 2002 at 10.9 and 9.4 billion pula respectively. But as of the last quarter of 2013, household consumption had risen dramatically to 15 billion pula, while GDP stood at 10 billion pula. Salaries have not improved much in that time. In fact, government, the largest employer in the nation, has had its wages pretty much frozen at the same rate for the past couple of years. Where are Botswana getting this buying power? We explore this topic with the Senior Research Fellow from the Botswana Institute for Development Policy Analysis, Professor Roman Grinberg, in this first segment of the show. Welcome to First Issues. Welcome back to the show as we discuss the sustainability of the numerous retail centers we see mushrooming across our cities. If there hasn't been a significant salary increase these past few years for a large segment of the population, who then are the people spending money at these malls?
If you speak to the business people who are operating out of these malls, what seems to be happening is an ever larger number of malls, and you have had relatively flat growth in incomes in Botswana in the last few years. That means that the expenditure that was previously confined to, say, Riverwalk and Game City is now being spread over 4 or 5 malls. So it isn't necessarily a very substantial growth. Wages in the public sector, as you're probably aware, haven't been rising, and that's been over a period of 5 years. Private and personal debt appears to be rising rapidly. So perhaps what is happening is a lot of the spending is debt financed.
So you wouldn't say it's a particular demographic that is keeping these malls and sustaining them?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's just one demographic, no. This is across the board in Botswana now. People from all sorts of walks of life are shopping in malls.
Do you have an idea of what people are spending their money on, and maybe what that says about our economy?
We've been doing a great deal of research on import patterns here in Botswana. There's a lot more expenditure on clothing, obviously on food and restaurants. But I mean, it was very interesting to hear the comments of the head of Choppies that they're finding it really difficult to sell luxury products anymore. People's real purchasing power has declined over the last few years, and people are shopping more and more for basics rather than so. As one would expect, wages and salaries haven't risen. They've fallen in real terms quite sharply over the last 5 years in the public service, and as a result, people don't have the spending power, the real purchasing power that they had previously. What they're spending on, as I said, there's been a shift away from the luxuries. What were once considered luxuries, like going out to restaurants. These are, if you speak to restaurant owners, they're hurting. They're hurting both from the decline in real salaries, and they're hurting from the increased number of malls which have ever more restaurants. So they have more competition, At the same time, their customers have less real income.
How do you see this playing out? Consumers have less spending power, and we're seeing more competition and more malls keep propping up.
Well, I mean, it's a natural life cycle. If you go to Main Mall, which is the oldest mall in Botswana, period, rents now there are down 50% from what they were in 2010. So it's basically no longer a place where people go to shop and to buy in the way that they used to 20 or 30 years ago. What tends to happen is that once these new malls open up, the rental and market value of the older malls falls. It's natural life cycle of both real property and of shopping malls. The problem is when you start opening up too many of them, is you end up with a glut, and you end up with the potential for a collapse in real estate values. It's only normal that the older malls, you go into the older malls around Gaborone, and you'll see more and more vacant shops and lower rents, because they simply can't attract the customers that they did. That happens all over the world, and it's no different here. Still, though, you see the two biggest, the oldest of the modern malls, Riverwalk and Game City, are still full. They're still full. You don't see large numbers of vacant shops, which is a good sign, all right? But I think you need to dig a bit deeper and speak to the businessmen themselves, and I think you'll find that they're suffering. That's what they tell me when I speak to them. I mean, I make a point of going in and talking to them, and because that's the way you learn, by talking to people, not sitting in front of computers. And they make it very clear that the malls and the declining real salaries are hurting.
Consumer spending is said to contribute 50% to China's GDP, almost 60% to the UK's, and closer to 70% in the US. To what extent, then, can we look to consumption as an alternative vehicle of economic growth?
I keep hearing this from some economists that our GDP is diversifying, which is true. As Botswana have gotten richer and richer over the years, the things that they consume are broadening out. All right, you've got insurance companies, you've got health providers, you've got restaurants, which basically didn't even exist 15 years ago. So all of these services are a direct result of increased prosperity, of greater consumption. But you can't base an economy, if you're perhaps China or the United States or the European Union, you can look inwards. But if you're Botswana, unless you've got something to export, right, unless you've got an export base, then you're in trouble. You cannot just base your economy on spending, because you have to have an income from somewhere. And that income comes from us selling diamonds. Last year, 83% of our exports were diamonds. So unless we've got something to sell, we're not going to consume.
Our guest says his conversations with various business people have revealed that things are not as good as they were 5 years ago, since there is more competition and less income, the two prevailing features of the retail trade. What indicators will show that we are getting to the point of saturation?
It makes perfectly good commercial sense. If you've got the latest mall, and it's the really popular one, all right, as long as the last mall that was built is still full, all right, you can say to your banker, this makes commercial sense. I'm almost certain I have full property on my mall. Now, if you build yet another mall, more and more of the older ones will suffer financially. But they don't care. I mean, the new developer, what does he care if Fairgrounds Mall is half empty, all right, or it has empty shops? They don't care. This is business, all right? And as long as they can point to the fact that you have the main shopping areas still full around the city, and it hasn't resulted in a collapse, they can still convince their bankers that this is a sound investment, as long as they're sure that the customers will come. There is a point where you can saturate the market and things just fall apart. I don't know where that point is. If I knew where that point is, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be a very wealthy person, but I don't know the future. But I can tell you that you can see the symptoms of trouble brewing in the retail sector from the point of view of listening to business people. It's not as good as it was 5 years ago, obviously. There's more competition, less income. They're the two prevailing features of the retail trade. I understand there's going to be yet another very large development occurring in CBD, a mall development. Now, that will be interesting to watch, to see what impact that has. That's supposed to be from, again, I've only heard what people in business are telling me. It's going to be a very large commercial development. What impact that will have, I think it might be worthwhile if you went to see the developers and say, are you not concerned that you might be the last mall in Gaborone for the next 20 years? Because when you go one too far and the market collapses, it'll be another couple of decades before somebody else tries it again. But that's business. That's in the nature of business. People look at a prospect, they see it worked. Airport Junction worked very nicely, right? And so they say, well, there's obviously room for more. I'm not sure if the mall across the road from Airport Junction is performing as satisfactorily as the developers might have hoped. So there are all sorts of issues of whether we're now getting to the point of saturation, given our modest economic growth over the last few years and our falling real purchasing power.
So this is the way it works. Is there no ideal way that the consumption and the development of malls should play out?
Clearly, providing businessmen with more information and more data helps them not make mistakes. There's precious little statistics and data out there about what's going on in the retail sector. There's really very little. And it would be useful if either Statistics Botswana or institutions like BIDPA had the capacity to be able to to provide regular updates on the state of business using really up-to-date data, and that's what's needed. The business community has to deal with statistics that are often very old, and they really need to have their finger on the pulse in order to be able to not make what could be a pretty horrendous mistake and that would affect the entire retail sector.
An economic review of the fourth quarter of 2012 by independent economist Dr. Keith Jeffries showed that household debt is increasing relative to income and GDP, and that although the levels are to be expected as the economy develops and the financial sector deepens, what is concerning is that household debt in Botswana is very short term, in contrast with more developed countries like South Africa, where the majority of consumer borrowing is for mortgages. We will continue to take a look at the implications of our current levels of borrowing and spending over the next few weeks with various industry experts. Next on the program, however, we take a look at the Know Your Customer initiative being rolled out in the commercial banking sector. Re a le amogela gape mo lenaneong la rona la First Issues.
Mo bekeng e e fetileng re simolotse puisano le Mme Lesego Thupa ya gale e bang moitseanape ka tsa poloko ya madi. O ne a re tlhalosetsa ka lenaneo le le simolotsweng ke dibanka go itse ba ba bolokang le bone botoka. Re simolotse ka go botsa gore ha re bua ka lenaneo la Know Your Customer re bua ka ga eng.
Lenaneo le la KYC ke lenaneo le bankang e lekang go netefatsa gore badirisi ba banka ba bašwa le ba ba ntseng ba le teng a ke boammaaruri ke bone ka ba ipua gore a ke bone. Ke tsela gore banka e itse gore o mang e be e netefatsa gore a maaruri kwena motho o buang gore o wene. Ha modirisi wa banka e le gone a bulang account, banka e be e sa mo itse. Ke yone nako e leng gore modirisi wa banka o tshwanetse gore a netefatse seemo sa gagwe. Le ha e le gore seemo sa gagwe se ka hetoga ya ka ha ka nyalwa kana a huduga ko na nna teng, ke yone nako e leng gore o tshwanetse gore a ikopanye le ba banka gore a ba itsise. Re tlhoka passport kana o mang ya gago ha o dirisa banka ka gore banka e tshwanetse re netefatse gore a mme ke nnete kwena o batlang go dirisa banka. Mo ke gone go leka go sireletsa gore basenyeletsi ba seka ba dirisa account ya gagwe for ditiro tse e leng gore ga se tsone tse di siameng gape tse di sa thamallang. So nako le nako ha o ta bankeng, ha o le Motswana o ta ka o mang wa gago, ha o le Motswakwa o ta ka passport.
Go tlhokagala eng le eng fa motho a batla go bula account le banka?
Ha o bula account go botlhokwa gore o te ka o mang ha e le gore o Motswana, o te ka passport ha e le gore o Motswakwa. Ha godimo ga moo go botlhokwa gore o te ka sesupo sa gore o nna kae. Sesupo se se ka tswa e le bili ya motlakase kana bili ya metsi kana lekwalo le le tswang ko kgosing. Account le ha e bulwa mo leineng la ngwana e santse e le ngwana. Ga re sologetse gore o ka tswa a na le boikarabelo gotlhelele. So motsadi o tlang a bula account ya ngwana ke ene re tsang gore ke ene a na le boikarabelo mo accounteng ya ngwana. Ha go ntse yalo re ta tlhoka gore motsadi a te ka o mang wa gagwe le sesupo sa gore o nna ko kae. Ha o adimile madi o batla go bula account e nngwe o tshwanetse gore o te ka o mang wa gore banka e netefatse gore kwena o batlang go bula account e nngwe. Ha e le gore seemo sa gago ga sa fetoga ga go tlhokagale gore o te ka sepe. Mme ha e le gore seemo sa gago se fetogile gongwe o nyetswe kana gongwe o hudugile ko no nna teng, ke gone ha banka e tabeng e tlhoka gore o ba fe sesupo sa gore seemo sa gago se fetogile. Fa e le gore seemo sa gago ga sa fetoga ga go tlhokagale gore o tle ka sepe ko bankeng go supa gore seemo sa gago ga sa fetoga. Ke hela ha e le gore seemo sa gago se fetogile o tshwanetseng gore o tsise ko bankeng bokai ba gore seemo sa gago se fetogile. Go botlhokwa gore leina la gago o lekwalo ya ka lentse le mo o mang kana lentse mo passporteng ya gago. Mo go re thusa gore re netefatse gore ka maaruri gore ke wena o e leng gore o bula account kana o leka gore o dirise account ya gago.
Go dirisiwa metlhala efe go netefatsa gore kgwebo e direla kae kgotsa motho o nna kae?
Go netefatsa gore motho o nna kae re tlhoka bili ya motlakase kana ya metsi kana lekwalo le le tswang ko kgosing. Gape ga godimo ga moo le lekwalo le le tswang ko mohiring wa gago le ka dirisiwa. Ha account e kopanetse botlhe ba e kopanetse ba tshwanetse gore ba te ko bankeng ka di umang tsa bone le di-passport tsa bone. Ha godimo ga moo ba tshwanetse gore ba te ka sesupo sa gore ba nna ko kae.
Kgaya tsebe go utlwa dikai tse di supang gore fa go te seemo sa modirisi se fetogile go tewa jang?
Sekai sa gore ha seemo sa modirisi wa banka se fetogile ke gore a modirisi wa banka gongwe o nyetswe, gongwe o tsere, gongwe o na nna ko mogoditshane yaanong o fudugetse ko tlokweng, gongwe o kila ba bereka ko komponing e nngwe yaanong o bone tiro mo komponing e sele. Kana ha godimo ga moo kana leina la gago le fetogile. Go botlhokwa go itsese banka seemo sa gago ka gore ga gongwe o tla fitlhela e le gore le dirisa maina a tshwanang, gape ga gongwe o ka iragala gore dirukhuthi di leke go dirisa account ya gago yaanong ga banka e itse sentle gore ko wena mang e kgona gore e go sireletse gape e sireletse le madi a gago lenaneo leo ke la go leka go sireletsa wena o le modirisi wa banka go botlhokwa gore o seka wa itlhokomolosa kitsiso e ka gore ga o sa isa seemo sa gago ko bankeng go kgona go iragala gore ga banka e re ya go thusa e be e tsaya lebaka ka gore e be e santse e batla go netefatsa gore a mme ke nnete ko wena o tlhokang dithuso tsa banka ga godimo ga moo go kgona go iragala gore dirukhuthi di leke go dirisa leina la gago ka gore yaanong banka e tabe e sena bonnete bo bo tsepameng gore ko wena monga account
a jaanong re lebetsa mebaraka go tswa go ba Botswana Stock Exchange.
Dumelang bagaetsho re tla lebatsa mmaraka wa peeletso Botswana Stock Exchange mo bekeng e fetileng. Sekale sa dikompone tsa mo gae se oketsegile ka 0.05% fa sekale sa dikompone tsa kontle sone se ne se sa fetoga mo bekeng. Tshoboko ya madi a diabe tse di gwebileng e ne e le 23.7 million pula, sena e le selekanyo sa 4.7 million pula ka letsatsi. Mo bekeng e fetileng go gwebile diabe di le 7.1 million. Mo ngwageng wa 2014 go lebega sekale sa dikompone tsa mo gae se wetse tlase ka 0.77% fa ka 2013 se ne se oketsegile ka 13.6%. Sekale sa dikompone tsa kontle sone se bone kgolo ya 0.15% fa ka 2013 se ne se wetse tlase ka 0.95%. Tshoboko ya madi a dirilweng ka theko le thekiso ya diabe mo marakeng wa Botswana Stock Exchange mo ngwageng ona ke 684.7 million pula fa ka 2013 e ne le 299.9 million pula. Mo ngwageng ona go gwebile diabe di le 184.7 million fa ka 2013 e ne le 118.2 million. Fa re leba di ETF Exchange Traded Funds, Beta Beta e oketsegile ka 2 pula 75 go etsa beke e gweba ka 41 pula 90 thebe, fa New Gold one e ne sa fetoga mme e weditse beke e gweba ka 108 pula 90 thebe. Pegone go tsholetse go lekalo go tswa Botswana Stock Exchange, nna ke Dumisani Ntini.
Re solofela fa le tlhalogantse bomosola le botlhokwa jwa go itsise dibanka tsa lona ka diphetogo mo diemong tsa lona ka nako tsotlhe. Go tswa go nna Nametso Sebina, badiri ka nna mmogo le barotloetsi ba rona e bong First National Bank, ra re a nne boroko.